Hello, ladies and gents. It is the last Monday of September, Monday the 26th. We're understanding politics on the module D211 Ideas and Institutions in the Modern World. When you read, make sure you record your reading. I'm recording on Facebook and I'm recording on YouTube. Understanding Politics, Ideas and Institutions in the Modern World, Book 1, edited by Geoff Andrews, Agnes Sajaki, Andy O'Kane, Raya Prokovinik, and Dan Taylor. Page 39. We're on the introduction of the page 39. The previous chapter introduced you to the idea that politics is essentially contested concept. It showed you that the definition of politics, ranging from that which concerns the state to social and public activity, are competing, yet at times also overlapping definitions, and that politics always involves a struggle over the meaning of political concepts. This chapter introduced you to the idea of politics, that politics also involves a struggle over the question, who does politics? And just like what is politics, the question of who does politics is deceptively simple. Let's take a look at these two phrases. Who does politics? Anyone who wants to become a political actor, anyone in society. Literally, doesn't matter how high hierarchy you are up the chain. You can be just average Joe blogs talking about the climate change of weather, the saving your energy in the house, the sunlight. That's acting as a political actor. Absolutely. What is politics? Politics is something that's institutionalized inside, well, this parliament, for instance. Obviously, you've got other, you've got Scotland Parliament, Scottish Parliament. I think they used to hold it in Wales in the Castell Coch, it's called, and obviously the White House in America. That's who does politics. Politicians, councillors, lords, prime ministers. We have politics in schools. You have politics in churches, safeguarding, prevent. That's all politics. Anyway, let's move on. It is in some sense obvious that politicians do politics as a matter of right. NSPCC is a political organisation as well. That's prevent, isn't it? Prevent, stopping children being neglect, malnutrition, abuse, sexually abused, all those kind of things. Anyway, they are empowered to govern the affairs of the state as elected legislators. In practice, this means govern citizens and non-citizens, residents such as migrants and refugees. Through national and international laws, citizens also do politics with their right to vote. This is called franchise. Disenfranchise is not the right to vote, just so you know, which is known as the franchise of suffrage. Well, I'm psychic. I know what's coming next because I've obviously studied franchise and disenfranchise in previous studies. Universal suffrage means every adult has a right to vote, which is a case of democracies. There are a few exceptions, such as the right of prisoners to vote, which we'll discuss below. Some prisoners deserve the right to vote or deserve the right to vote, depending on their imprisonment in the first place. Why did they get there? Citizens elect the politicians whom they judge the best representatives of their interests. Doing politics, this then involves politicians convincing citizens that they have developed the best policies to serve them. And citizens periodically voting politicians into the office as their representatives. So who does politics appears fairly obvious, with politicians and citizens as its uncontested actors. Yet there are other actors who play significant roles in politics by mediating between citizens and politicians, such as professional institutions, lawyers, associations, or trade unions, for example. corporations and the media, newspaper, television, and the internet. In this chapter, we focus on how citizens do politics, but citizens is neither a static nor a homogeneous group. Universal suffrage is quite recent. The story of the 20th century has been a progressive enfranchisement of the people who are previously disenfranchised. Many citizens, such as those without property, women and black people, were, until very recently, disenfranchised from politics. Even in countries have long been regarded as democracies. Universal suffrage is not quite universal either, as political theorist Ludwig Beckham in 2009, page 9, argues that the countries in which universal suffrage is reportedly in place, page 40, continuously enforce a variety of restrictions on who can and who cannot vote, with the effect that not everyone enjoys this right. Even in contemporary democracies, there are many restrictions and qualifications on who can vote, so progressive enfranchisement is a continuing process, with new demands and claims to get involved in politics continuing to be made. The key idea of this chapter is that those who are unable or unwilling to vote by status, choice, or circumstance still find their way into politics. When politicians govern the affairs of the state and pass legislation, it inevitably involves choosing courses of action that have different impacts on different interests in society. Bringing these interests into politics means finding your way into politics. We sometimes become members of associations, organisations, and societies that serve specific interests. We may also become actively involved in party politics. We may become involved in trade unions, charities, groups, and movements. We may participate in street demonstrations and protests. We may join boycotts of products or even other governments. We may sign petitions and manifestos, and sometimes... Hello, Joe. How you doing, buddy? You all right, mate? Sorry, mate, I didn't see you there. We may find ourselves in situations where our acts become political. We will call all these ways of doing politics performing politics. This phrase helps us to consider how citizens and non-citizens act to become involved in politics. Suffrage is perhaps the oldest and best known way of performing politics, but without considering other ways of performing politics, such as protesting, demonstrating and boycotting, it is difficult to understand the breadth of politics in democratic and non-democratic societies. In the next section, we discuss the meaning of performing politics. Then, in this section that follows, we focus on 3 questions regarding the performance of politics. Who should perform politics? Who can perform politics? Who does perform politics? Page 41. Sorry, mate, I didn't see that, Joe. Are we being political? Are we being political when watching a football game? Are we being political when watching a film? Are we being political when visiting a museum? Are we being political when we like something on Facebook? These acts of watching, visiting, and liking are acts that we perform in our everyday lives, but are they political? Or more precisely, how and when can they become political? These questions are more difficult to answer than a question, are we being political when we vote? The answer to that last question is evidently simple, because the act of voting, at least in representative democracies, is an institutionalized aspect of performing politics. It is a political right of citizenship. The questions do not necessarily involve politics, are considered aspects of our cultural, social, or private lives. However, as you may have seen in previous chapter, we call the example on kissing. There are times when cultural, social, and private lives cross or spill into political lives and become unquestionably political. A football game can become political if players begin the game by taking a knee as a statement against racism. Watching a film can be overtly political act if film is banned, censored, denounced by an authority, or renounced by a pressure group. There is nothing inherently political about an act of watching a film, and Under certain circumstances, such acts may well become overtly political. Similarly, visiting a museum may usually be a leisure activity, but under certain circumstances, due to the artist or the content of an exhibit, it can become political. So the question here is, in what sense are we considering certain acts as being political? What are the qualities that transform a football game from a leisure activity into a political action? How does cultural, society, family, friendship, or anything else spill over into the political? If needed, every action and every activity has the potential to cross or spill over into politics. Does that mean that everything is political? Do we want to live in a world where everything is political? Do we want to live in a world where we are political all the time? Yet at the same time, can we avoid the fact that anything can become political? What then does performing politics entail? How do we take part in political affairs and perform politics? To begin, in each of these cases mentioned above, being political involves two things. First, it often involves questioning what is accepted as a given state of affairs. And, page 42, second, it involves influencing or wanting to influence the state of affairs. This influence can be directed toward either conserving the state of affairs or changing it. We name these two conditions of performing politics: question and power. When we study circumstances in which people act politically, we often discover that becoming political almost always begins with a question. It begins with calling into the question a given state of affairs or course of events. Here we see all three basic meanings of the verb to question at work. It is an inquiry asking why a certain state of affairs exists. It disputes or endorses a certain course of events. It renders something into an issue, something that becomes a subject of or argument. Performing politics also involves power, in the sense that being political or acting politically means making a claim to influence a certain state of affairs or course of events. So, as a shorthand, we can approach performing politics as a question of power. Performing politics involves us citizens when we claim a right to question a given state of affairs and claim a right to influence a course of events, leading to the conversation of or change in this state of affairs. We can find this chapter of performing politics as a question of power in numerous struggles that often come to be symbolised by certain acts that are portrayed in international media for their dramatic qualities. As performers of politics, let us consider an act that suggests struggles more than any other. It happened in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, USA. Rosa Parks, an African-American civil rights activist, disobeyed a bus driver order that she give up her seat in the black section to a white passenger after the white section was filled. Page 43, Are We Being Political? Chapter 2. Rosa Parks, 1913 to 2005. Whose refusal to give up a seat set on the bus boycott in Montgomery and Alabama? The fingerprinting was on 1st December 1955. She obeyed the order she received because she questioned segregation and did not think it was right or just. Her ad led to a boycott of buses in Montgomery and was a decisive moment in the civil rights movement as a collective struggle. Much has been said about her act, and Parks eventually became a hero against her misgivings and was monumentalized in Washington, D.C. with a statue. However, it is important to remember that at the time of her act, she was vilified by government authorities, and the future of struggles for civil rights was anything but certain. That she refused to give up her seat articulated a question of power concerning civil rights claims and rendered a black woman as a political actor, one who has a right to perform politics. Through performing politics and organising struggles, individuals and social groups become political actors, irrespective of whether their right to perform politics is already recognised. Page 44. Figure 2. Civil Rights March in Washington, D.C. on August the 28th, 1963. A procession of African Americans carrying signs for equal rights, integrated schools, decent housing, and end to racism. These examples may lead you to think that politics is always performed by those citizens or non-citizens who are disenfranchised. Disenfranchisement does not only mean being unable to vote. Groups in society can be disfranchised in other ways, such as being the object of police scrutiny. Often black or minority ethnic people, the object of sexual harassment, often women, or the object of discrimination, or often disabled people. As we have seen earlier, disenfranchised groups often perform politics to seek enfranchisement, but making rights claims can apply as much to enfranchised groups as to disenfranchised groups, especially given that we consider performing politics as a right to question a given state of affairs and a right to influence the course of events. After all, the right to question a given state of affairs can involve claims to maintain and conserve a given social or political order. It is important to recognise that any contestation over a given state of affairs will involve people who want to conserve the existing order, those who want to change it, and those who want to transform the rules of the game. In a sense, as you will learn in chapters, the political ideologies of conservatism, liberalism, and radicalism as rough equivalents of these three positions. Many individuals may have conflicting claims upon themselves due to multiple affiliations. They may want to exercise simultaneously both a right to change the state of affairs, say making rights to claim the same-sex marriage, and a right to conserve them, say making right claims to restrict migration. There is no formula that would enable anyone to illustrate how certain individuals are performing politics and how they are making rights claims before they carefully study the circumstances of performing politics. As political theorist Karen Zibby, 2012, page 9 says, if one of the fundamental reasons for making right claims is to put an end to injustice, misery, violence, and other harms once and for all, then we want to know exactly what worked or went wrong in a particular instance, so as to learn from the past and ensure a particular future. In this section, we have developed the idea that acting politically involves claiming the right to question the state of affairs and influence the course of events. We also related both these aspects to making rights to claims. We can now provisionally say that performing politics involves a question of power and making right claims. But in this chapter, our focus is not on how these rights claims are articulated or where such claims are enacted. Our focus is on who perform politics by making such right claims. One of the key ideas of this chapter is that acting politically or being political means entering contestation about who should make the claims, who can make them, who actually does. What affairs should properly concern on is whom is always contested. To put it differently, performing politics concerns three issues: who should perform politics, who can perform politics, and who does politics. We will now take in turn to see how each three issues combine practically to create the stages on which politics is performed. Are we being political? Who should perform politics? If performing politics involves, page 46, if politics involves contestation over rights, it also involves deciding on norms. Concerning who should perform politics, as I mentioned above, the rights to vote in parliamentary and local government elections is the most important official act that political actors can perform. Since both citizens and non-citizens can vote in various elections, who can perform politics is, in practice, a legal issue, and we'll discuss its complications in the context here. We discuss how normative questions are settled and with respect to the question of who should perform politics. The question of norms brings to the fore the question of power and social groups in societies, since the contestation about who should perform politics is not independent from how power is exercised. What dominant ideologies facilitate its exercise, and how various actors are distributed across positions reflect their social status and stand in relation to other social actors. How do we understand social groups as actors when we vote, for example? We act as both individual and social actors. Voting is individual in the same sense that to exercise our right to vote, we must identify ourselves and prove our individual eligibility. Yet it is also social because it is about electing other individuals like ourselves to represent a constituency of individuals with shared interests. Similarly, when we consider social groups, clearly they are made up of individual actors, often citizens, but occasionally also non-citizens, who act as individuals, but their acts bring social groups into being whose presence and existence constitute politics. There are two observations to bear in mind regarding the aspect of social groups as social actors who perform politics. Social groups cannot act as such without individuals acting in their name, for instance. When we say women won the right to vote, we actually mean to say that many individuals amongst them, poor and wealthy, men and of course women, have struggled to gain a right for women to vote, which is clearly more cumbersome than saying women won the right to vote. Through this may be an obvious point it needs making. Each individual belongs to and is affiliated with more than one social group. An individual identifies as black, female, and lesbian can take part in politics that concerns any combination or intersection of these identities that constitute her as a social actor. Moreover, she may also take part in politics that have nothing to do with these affiliations and identities, but concern, for instance, environmental issues or international affairs. Though, of course, environmental issues also often intersect with their aforementioned identities. The example, women and black people are disproportionately negatively affected by climate change, pollution, and so on. Further, she may also take part in affairs that concern others. She may take part in affairs and concern those individuals who identify as white, male, and straight. We need to keep these 2 points in mind as we discuss below certain social groups become social actors of politics. Climate change affects us all. We need to keep these 2 points in mind as we discuss below certain social groups become social actors in politics. Since we mentioned earlier that the story of the 20th century has been a progressive enfranchisement of people who have been previously disenfranchised, let us begin with a brief historical outline. Historically, several social groups were identified by governments as being incapable of performing politics, and hence, with disfranchised, we will focus on the following 3 groups. The first group was the non-propertied of working classes who were thought not to have a capacity to perform politics because they were rowdy, rogue, and uneducated. They were perceived as the mob. They could not be given the right to vote. The introduction of universal male suffrage was as recent as the late 19th century in the most liberal democracies. Working class people staged intense struggles for suffrage that often involved marches, demonstrations, strikes, protests, and other acts of performing politics. The main British group was the Chartist, a working class movement for political reform. In the UK, it was only 1918 that the Representation of the People Act ended property qualification for male suffrage. The second disenfranchised social group was women. They were considered too emotional and irrational to be able to perform politics, and thus were not considered legitimate performers of politics. Although in 1918, the Act gave some women over 30 votes suffrage for all adult women above the age of 21, was accepted in the UK only in 1928 after decades of social struggles led by women activists who gave to be known as suffragettes. Their struggles involved some of the classic acts of politics, often illegal, such as chaining themselves to railings and statues and burning mailboxes. The third disenfranchised group was black people who both in the United States and some European countries waged intense struggles for franchises or suffrages. In the US, it was in 1870 that the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution adopted the principle that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, colour, or previous condition or servitude. National Constitution, no date yet. This still did not include women who did not gain the right to vote until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Moreover, although black people had the right to vote in the US, the voting system had been set up in a way that effectively disenfranchised them, something that has still not been entirely remedied. Page 49. British suffragette Emmeline Pankhurst was arrested and carried away by a policeman for leading suffragettes in an attempt to present a petition to King George V at Buckingham Palace, 2nd of June 1914. If the working class earned the right to vote as a result of the struggles and only succeeded in the 20th century, how were they disenfranchised until then? They were excluded by performing politics by property qualifications. The exclusion was simple. If you did not own a property of a certain value, you were banned from voting and running for office. But how could those who had property acquire such rights in the first place? How did it become that those with property earned the right to vote and run for office? For that, you need to look earlier in the 1830s when we saw a social group. You can call it the new middle class, the bourgeois of capitalists, depending on your persuasion. Is that you, Joe? Sorry, man, when you come in earlier, I didn't recognise, I didn't realise I was reading. Begin making presents known as entering into politics. Before the 1830s, this group was itself excluded from performing politics by a social group known as the nobility. To put it differently, the right to perform politics was inherited in the, just can't see end, in the same way as property. Leave that reading there. Done reading for today. I've got to do some